So, my name is Michael Goebel. I teach global history at Freie Universität Berlin. Previously, I had a position at the Geneva Graduate Institute. And I teach global history. I also research global history. My trajectory in general has moved me from intellectual history increasingly to social and economic history, which is what I now do. I initially had a focus on Latin American history, which was what my first book was about. I then wrote a second book, which was about anti-colonialism in interwar Paris, entitled Anti-Imperial Metropolis. And since then, I increasingly have focused on global urban history, where I also added a book series and am a board member of an association. And this is what I now also research, mostly starting with a project financed by the Swiss National Science Foundation entitled Patchwork Cities, which is initially about segregation in port cities in the 19th century. So my work here at Global Disconnect concerns two book projects which I hope to research and write. I'm not sure if I'm going to finish them within the year. One is a general survey about modern urban history in the 19th and 20th centuries globally, and it essentially charts the rise and fall of European or North Atlantic hegemony in global urbanization. So how come that Western European and then North American cities became globally dominant around 1900 before urban growth in the global south took over in the 20th century, and how this relates to epistemological questions about how we conceive of cities, which were largely shaped at that particular historical moment of European urban hegemony around 1900. The second project is much more specific and essentially a micro-history of race, immigration and real estate in 19th century Buenos Aires. And it particularly looks at the emergence of a black neighborhood in 19th century Buenos Aires, how this came about. And this was tied specifically to the acquisition of real estate. So that's the rise part of the story. And the second part of the story, which I focus on more, is the subsequent dispossession of these black homeowners who were eventually replaced by large numbers of European immigrants, in particular from Italy. And I look specifically at how this process of what I call dispossession or expropriation worked, and how and why it came about and what its consequences were. And so in this project I look at a variety of sources. It started with 19th century censuses, which have the original census sheets preserved and list every person, which is where I first realized that there emerged such a black neighborhood and that this was intimately tied to home ownership. So I look at these censuses in great deal, then on their basis and on the basis of tax lists also and real estate purchase contracts, I map the specific homeowner structure in this neighborhood, and in particular the dispossession between 1855 and 1870. So how come these black homeowners lost their real estate, and this is shown in many maps. I also create maps of the municipal origins of European immigrants and how essentially emigration in particular regions in Europe, such as Liguria and the Basque Country, rose over time. So how emigration fever spread in these areas of origin, which lost a significant part of population already in the mid-19th century, which then related to real estate in Europe of these emigrants who crossed the Atlantic. So essentially I look at the relationship of real estate on both sides of the Atlantic and how this ties to changing forms of inequality, both within the sending areas and in Buenos Aires. So in this project, the relationship to connectivity and disconnectivity is particularly interesting because I'm essentially looking at migration. So migrants, people who moved, who created and reinforced a connection. And on the other hand, real estate, the very translation of which into most non-English languages, for instance, German Immobilien, already in the words carries the notion that this was property that could not be moved, that was immobile. So the relationship between migration and disconnectivity essentially implies a relationship between connectivity and disconnectivity because people were dealing with property that could not be moved. More broadly, this is a project about globalization and inequality, in which, of course, globalization can be perceived as a form of connectivity, but also rising forms of inequality in urban space, but also in ascending areas, which are not exactly disconnectivity, but are a form of widening socioeconomic gaps. So people being increasingly disconnected socioeconomically, if you will.